Captain Zara Voss pressed her face against the cold viewport of the research vessel Seeker's Dream. The planet below looked peaceful enough, rolling green hills dotted with strange crystalline formations that caught the light of the system's twin suns. But peace was the last thing on her mind as she watched the thick fog bank rolling across the landscape like a living thing. "Captain, we're picking up those signals again," came the voice of her communications officer, Lieutenant Hayes. The young man's face was pale as he adjusted his headset. Same as before, but stronger now. Zara turned from the viewport, her boots clicking against the metal deck plating. The bridge of the Seeker's Dream was cramped but functional, packed with the latest scanning equipment the Galactic Scientific Coalition could afford, which wasn't much considering how far out on the frontier they were operating. "Put it through the speakers," she ordered, settling into her command chair. The bridge filled with a sound that made everyone's skin crawl. It started low like a whale song, then rose to something almost like screaming. But it wasn't quite right. Too structured, too purposeful to be an animal cry. There was intelligence behind it, and more than that, there was pain. "Analysis?" Zara asked, though she dreaded the answer. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the expedition's xenobiologist, looked up from her console with troubled eyes. "The vocal patterns are consistent with distress calls we've documented from 12 different sapient species. But, Captain, the interesting thing is the linguistic structure. It's not random crying. There are repeated phrases, what might be coordinates, and something that could be a countdown." "A countdown to what?" "Unknown. But, based on the frequency changes, I estimate we have maybe 6 hours before whatever they're counting down to reaches zero." Zara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's recycled air. They were 3 days out from the nearest coalition outpost, 2 weeks from any major colony. The Seeker's Dream was a research vessel, not a warship. Her crew of 15 scientists and technicians were equipped to study plant samples and take soil readings, not mount rescue operations for unknown aliens. "Sir," Hayes interrupted, "I'm detecting multiple energy signatures on the surface. They're huge, and they're moving toward the source of the distress signals." On the main screen, false color images painted a picture that made Zara's stomach drop. Massive shapes, each one easily the size of a city block, were converging on a small valley where the signals seemed to originate. The fog was thickest there, so dense that even their best sensors couldn't penetrate it completely. "What are we looking at, Hayes?" "Best guess? Some kind of predators. The heat signature suggests they're biological, but the size." He shook his head. "Captain, nothing that big should be able to move that fast." Dr. Vasquez stood up from her station, her face grim. "Captain, I need to recommend that we attempt contact. Whatever's down there, they're clearly in trouble. And if they're intelligent enough to broadcast coordinates and maintain a countdown, they might have technology we've never seen before. Or they might be bait," countered Chief Engineer Rodriguez from his position near the environmental controls. "We don't know anything about this system. For all we know, those distress calls are designed to lure in rescue ships." Zara considered this. Rodriguez had a point. They'd encountered deceptive alien species before. But the crying, the raw desperation in those voices felt too real to fake. And there was something else, something that had been nagging at her since they'd first detected the signals. "Hayes, run a linguistic analysis on those distress calls. Compare them to our database of known sapient species." "Already running, Captain. Should have results in a few minutes." While they waited, Zara studied the planet below. Kepler 442c had been marked for routine scientific survey, Class M atmosphere, suitable for human colonization if the coalition ever expanded this far out. The initial probe data had shown no signs of intelligent life, just the usual mix of primitive organisms you'd expect on a young world. But the probes hadn't detected the fog either. "Captain," Hayes said suddenly, his voice tight with excitement, "you need to see this. The linguistic analysis just finished." On the main screen, a complex chart appeared showing wave patterns and phonetic structures. But it was the conclusion at the bottom that made everyone on the bridge go silent. "Linguistic match. 94.7% probability of Terran origin." "That's impossible," Dr. Vasquez whispered. "There are no human colonies in this sector. The nearest human settlement is 14 light years away." Zara felt her heart begin to race. "Hayes, are you telling me those distress calls are coming from humans?" "Not exactly, Captain. The analysis suggests the language patterns are derived from Terran Standard, but they've evolved significantly. Based on the linguistic drift patterns, I'd estimate these people have been isolated from the main human population for at least 200 years. A lost colony, Rodriguez breathed. But how? There are no records of any colony ships in this direction. The answer came to Zara in a flash of intuition that made her blood run cold. The Aurora, she said quietly. Everyone on the bridge turned to stare at her. The Aurora was legend among spacers, a colony ship that had disappeared during the early days of human expansion, carrying 20,000 colonists to what they thought was an uninhabited system. The ship had simply vanished, never reaching its destination, never sending a distress call. After 5 years of searching, it had been declared lost with all hands. Captain, Dr. Vasquez said carefully, the Aurora disappeared over 250 years ago. Even if some of the colonists survived, even if they somehow made it to this planet, they'd have had time to establish a civilization, Zara finished. Maybe even to develop new technologies. And now something's hunting them. On the screen, the massive energy signatures had reached the edge of the valley where the distress calls originated. The signals suddenly changed, becoming more frantic, more desperate. But there was something new in them now, defiance. The hidden colonists, whoever they were, weren't going down without a fight. Captain, I'm reading weapons fire, Hayes reported. Energy weapons, chemical explosives, and something else I can't identify. But it's not slowing those things down. Zara made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Set us down. Emergency landing protocols. We're going in. Captain, with respect, that's suicide, Rodriguez protested. We have no idea what we're walking into down there. We know the humans are dying, Zara shot back. Humans who have been lost and forgotten for 2.5 centuries. Maybe we can't save them all, but we can't just sit up here and watch them be slaughtered either. She activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We are attempting a rescue operation on the surface. This is strictly voluntary. Anyone who wants to remain with the ship is free to do so. But I'm asking for volunteers to help me save what might be the last remnant of the Aurora colony. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every single member of her crew volunteered. As the Seeker's dream began its descent through the atmosphere, the fog seemed to reach up toward them like grasping fingers. The distress calls grew louder, more urgent, and now Zara could make out individual words in the ancient dialect of Terran Standard. Help us! The voices cried through the static. They come through the fog. They hunt us in the mist. Help us, please, before the darkness falls forever. The ship shuddered as it entered the fog bank, and suddenly their instruments went haywire. Navigation systems spun wildly, communications filled with interference, and the artificial gravity flickered ominously. Hull integrity holding, Rodriguez called out, fighting to keep the ship stable. But whatever this fog is made of, it's playing hell with our electronics. Through the swirling gray mist, Zara caught glimpses of the landscape below. Alien ruins covered in vines, strange geometric patterns carved into hillsides, and in the distance, the glow of what might be energy weapons fire. There, Dr. Vasquez shouted, pointing at her scanners. I'm reading human life signs. About 2 clicks north of our current position. And about 50 of those big nasties converging on the same location, Hayes added grimly. Zara gripped her command chair as the ship bucked and rolled in the strange atmospheric disturbances created by the fog. Set us down as close as you can, Rodriguez, and prep the emergency equipment. We're going to need everything we've got. As the Seeker's dream touched down on the alien soil with a bone-jarring impact, Zara looked out at the wall of fog surrounding them. Somewhere in that gray murk, the descendants of the lost Aurora colony were fighting for their lives against creatures that defied imagination. She activated her personal communicator and began issuing orders. All teams, check your equipment. We go in hard and fast. Our job is to find the survivors and get them to safety. Questions? Just one, Captain, came the voice of Ensign Martinez, their youngest crew member. What if we can't save them all? Zara considered the question as she checked her sidearm and emergency beacon. Outside, the fog pressed against the ship's hull like a living thing, and the distress calls echoed through the mist with increasing desperation. Then, we make sure their sacrifice means something, she said finally, and we make damn sure the galaxy knows what happened to the Aurora. As her crew prepared for what might be their final mission, Captain Zaravas stepped toward the airlock door. Beyond it lay mystery, danger, and quite possibly death. But also the chance to solve one of humanity's greatest mysteries and save lives that everyone else had given up for lost. The fog swirled around the ship like a hungry beast, and in the distance, something roared with a sound like thunder. The hunt was about to begin, and Zaravas intended to be right in the middle of it. The distress calls suddenly, cut off, replaced by an ominous silence that was somehow worse than the screaming. Hayes looked up from his communications console, his face pale. "Captain, they've stopped transmitting." "Are they?" Zara couldn't finish the question. "Unknown. Could be equipment failure, could be—" He didn't finish either. Zara felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. 15 lives in her hands, and possibly hundreds more in that fog-shrouded valley. She thought of the Aurora, of 20,000 people who had trusted their leaders to bring them to a new world, only to vanish into the dark between the stars. History would not repeat itself on her watch. "Open the airlock," she ordered. "We're going in." As the ship's doors opened with a hydraulic hiss, the fog rolled in like a living tide, carrying with it the sense of an alien world and the promise of answers that had been hidden for over 2 centuries. The fog was alive. That was Zara's first thought as she stepped off the Seeker's Dream's landing ramp and into the alien mist. It moved wrong, flowing against the wind in patterns that made no sense. Where normal fog would drift and dissipate, this gray wall seemed to pulse with purpose, reaching out with tendrils that wrapped around the landing party like curious fingers. "Stay close," she ordered through her helmet communicator. "Nobody wanders more than 5 meters from the group." Her team of 12 moved in tight formation through the swirling gray. Dr. Vasquez carried a portable scanner that beeped erratically in the electromagnetic interference. Chief Rodriguez hefted a military-grade plasma rifle borrowed from the ship's emergency arsenal. The rest carried a mix of scientific equipment and light weapons that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. The ground beneath their feet was wrong, too. What had looked like normal soil from orbit felt spongy and gave off a faint phosphorescent glow wherever they stepped. Strange crystalline formations jutted up through the mist like alien tombstones, each one humming with barely audible harmonics. "Captain," whispered Ensign Martinez, the team's geologist. "These crystal formations, they're not natural. Someone carved these patterns." Zara paused to examine the nearest crystal. Even through the fog, she could see intricate geometric designs etched into its surface. But they weren't human designs. The angles were too sharp, the symmetry too perfect for human tools. "How old?" she asked. Martinez ran his scanner over the crystal surface. "Difficult to say with all this interference, but thousands of years minimum, maybe tens of thousands." "So we're not the first ones here," Dr. Vasquez murmured. "The question is, where are they now?" The answer came as a low moan that seemed to rise from the ground itself. It started beneath their feet and grew until it filled the air around them, a sound like wounded metal and dying stars. The fog shivered and began to move faster, swirling in patterns that hurt to look at. "That's not coming from the colonists," Hayes said, checking his equipment. "That's something else entirely." They pressed forward, using their portable beacon to maintain direction toward the last known location of the human life signs. The fog seemed to resist their movement, growing thicker and more oppressive with each step. Strange shapes flitted at the edge of their vision, tall, impossible geometries that vanished the moment they tried to focus on them. "Contact," Rodriguez called out suddenly, raising his rifle. 2 o'clock, approximately 30 meters. Through the mist, a dark shape moved toward them. It was roughly humanoid, but wrong in every detail, too tall, too thin, with joints that bent in directions that made Zara's eyes water. As it drew closer, she could see that its skin had a metallic sheen, and where its face should be, there was only a smooth, oval surface that reflected their lights like a mirror. "Hold fire," Zara ordered, though her own hand moved to her sidearm. "Let's see what it wants." The creature stopped just at the edge of their vision and stood motionless. Then it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed deeper into the fog. When none of them moved, it repeated the gesture, more urgently. "I think it wants us to follow," Dr. Vasquez whispered. "Could be a trap," Rodriguez countered. "Could be," Zara agreed. "But it could also be our only chance of finding the colonists. And that thing doesn't look like it needs to trick us if it wants us dead." They followed the creature deeper into the mist. It moved with fluid grace, never quite disappearing, but never coming close enough for them to get a good look at it. The fog began to change around them, taking on different colors, deep purples and electric blues that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "Captain," Hayes said suddenly, "I'm picking up the distress signals again. But they're different now." "How different?" "They're not in that evolved Terran standard anymore. I think they're in the original language of the Aurora colonists. Old Terran standard, exactly as it would have been spoken 250 years ago." Zara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien atmosphere. "Play it." The voice that came through their communicators was unmistakably human, speaking in the archaic accent of early colonial expeditions. "If anyone can hear this, we are the survivors of the colony's ship, Aurora. We have been trapped in this place for longer than we can measure. The things in the fog, they hunt us, but they also protect us from something worse. Do not trust the mist. Do not trust the lights. Find the center. Find the truth before." The transmission cut off with a burst of static that made everyone wince. "That voice," Dr. Vasquez said slowly. "Captain, I've studied the historical records of the Aurora. That sounded like Captain Marcus Webb, the expedition commander. But that's impossible. He'd be over 300 years old. Maybe it's a recording," Martinez suggested. "Something that's been playing on repeat for centuries." "No," Hayes shook his head. "The signal characteristics are all wrong for a recording. And there are real-time fluctuations in the voice pattern. Someone spoke those words within the last few minutes." The creature ahead of them stopped and turned back, its featureless face somehow conveying urgency. Through the fog, Zara could see lights ahead. Not the strange phosphorescence they've been seeing, but warm, electric lights that could only come from human technology. "There," she breathed. "That has to be them." They emerged from the thickest part of the fog into a scene that defied comprehension. The valley spread out before them like something from a fever dream. Human structures, recognizable prefab buildings from the early colonial era, sat side by side with alien constructions that hurt to look at directly. Gardens of familiar earth vegetables grew in soil that glowed faintly blue, tended by figures that moved with human gait but wore strange, form-fitting suits that seemed to blur at the edges. And everywhere, the fog swirled in patterns that suggested intelligence, as if the mist itself was watching, evaluating, deciding. "My God," Dr. Vasquez whispered. "They're really here. They're actually alive." But as they drew closer, Zara began to notice the details that made her stomach turn. The human figures never came fully into focus, their edges wavering like heat mirages. The buildings, while recognizably human in design, were covered in the same crystalline growths they'd seen throughout the fog. And the lights, those warm, welcoming lights, cast shadows that moved independently of their sources. "Captain," Rodriguez said quietly, "something's wrong here. This doesn't feel right." Before Zara could respond, one of the human figures turned toward them. Even through the distance and the wavering effect of the fog, she could see that it was wearing the uniform of an Aurora colony ship officer. The figure raised its hand in greeting and began walking toward them with a stride that was almost, but not quite, normal. "Welcome," the figure called out in a voice that carried clearly through the mist. "We have been waiting so long for rescue. So very, very long." As it drew closer, Zara could make out more details. The uniform was intact, but wrong. Too clean for something that should be centuries old, and the fabric seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at it. The figure's face was human, but the proportions were slightly off, as if someone had tried to recreate humanity from a half-remembered description. "I am Captain Marcus Webb of the colonial vessel Aurora," the figure said, stopping just outside of arm's reach. "Thank you for responding to our distress call. Our situation is complicated." "Captain Webb," Zara said carefully, "according to our records, the Aurora disappeared over 250 years ago." "You should be dead, yes," Webb interrupted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm quite aware of the temporal discrepancy. Time moves differently here in the fog. We have learned to adapt." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "How many survivors are there? What happened to your ship? And what are those creatures we detected on our scanners?" Webb's expression darkened. "The hunters. They come with the tide of mist, seeking what they have always sought. We hide from them, as our predecessors taught us, as the builders of this place taught those who came before." "Builders?" Zara asked. "You mean this planet was inhabited when you arrived?" Oh yes, Webb said, and now his smile was definitely not human. Very much inhabited. But the builders were generous. They offered us sanctuary from the void between stars when our ship began to fail. Sanctuary from death. Sanctuary from time itself. All they asked in return was that we help them tend their garden. He gestured toward the valley, where more figures were now visible moving between the buildings. Too many figures, Zara realized. Far more than could have fit on a single colony ship. You see, Webb continued, death is not the end here. Not if you accept the mist into yourself. Not if you let it change you, improve you, perfect you. We have become so much more than we ever were as mere humans. Rodriguez raised his rifle slightly. Captain, I think we should go. Now. But Webb was still talking, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality. The hunters come in cycles, you see. Great beasts from beyond the veil of reality, drawn by the scent of unchanged flesh. But here in the valley, under the protection of the mist, we are safe. We can offer you the same safety, the same improvements. What kind of improvements? Dr. Vasquez asked, though Zara noticed her hand was now resting on her sidearm. Webb's form began to waver more noticeably, and for a moment, Zara saw what might have been his true shape, something tall and angular, with too many joints and skin that reflected light like polished metal. The vision lasted only a second before the human appearance reasserted itself, but it was enough. You're not human anymore, she said quietly. You haven't been human for a long time. Webb's smile widened, showing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. Humanity was always a temporary condition, Captain, a chrysalis state before something greater. We shed that limitation long ago, but we remember what it was like, and we can help you make the transition more comfortable. Around them, the fog was growing thicker, more oppressive. The other figures in the valley were moving closer now, and Zara could see that none of them cast proper shadows. Their movements were too synchronized, too purposeful, like parts of a single organism pretending to be individuals. The real colonists, she said, realization hitting her like a physical blow. Where are the real colonists? Webb's expression became almost pitying. They accepted the gift willingly, most of them. The others, well, the mist is patient, but not infinitely so. You heard their calls for help because some small part of them still remembers being human. But that will fade in time, as all things fade. A new sound began to echo through the valley, a deep, rhythmic pounding like a massive heartbeat. The fog pulsed in time with it, and the temperature began to drop noticeably. Ah, Webb said, tilting his head as if listening to something only he could hear. The hunters have found your ship. Such a pity. But do not worry. They cannot enter the sanctuary. You will be safe here. Forever. Zara felt the walls of the trap closing around them. The fog was now so thick she could barely see her own team, and the temperature was dropping fast enough to trigger the environmental warnings on their suits. Everyone back to the ship, she ordered. Full retreat now. But even as she gave the command, she knew they were already lost. The fog had closed around them like a living thing, cutting off all retreat. In the distance, something roared with a sound like breaking galaxies, and she realized that whatever was hunting in the mist was far worse than the creatures that had replaced the Aurora colonists. They were trapped between predator and prey, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. And all around them, the fog pulsed with alien intelligence and ancient hunger, waiting for them to make the choice that would determine whether they lived, died, or became something else entirely. The last thing Zara heard before the communications went dead was the sound of her ship's hull being torn apart by something that should not have been able to exist in reality. They were cut off now, stranded in a place where time moved differently, and the dead walked among the living. The real fight was about to begin. The sound of screaming metal echoed across the valley as something massive tore through the hull of the Seeker's dream. Zara watched helplessly through the fog as her ship, her lifeline back to civilization, was reduced to twisted wreckage by creatures that moved like living shadows. Communications are down, Hayes reported, his voice tight with fear. Emergency beacon, main transmitter, everything. Whatever those things are, they've cut us off completely. The false Captain Webb stood watching the destruction with an expression of mild interest, as if he were observing an interesting scientific experiment rather than the death of their only escape route. Such a waste, he said conversationally. Your vessel had such interesting technology. We could have learned much from it. But the hunters are thorough in their work. What are those things? Dr. Vasquez demanded, her scientific curiosity warring with obvious terror. Webb turned toward her, and for a moment his human mask slipped entirely, revealing something that was all angles and reflective surfaces. The hunters are older than this world, older than your species, older than most of what you call reality. They exist in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the essence of thinking beings. They are why the builders created the sanctuary, why they offer the gift of transformation to those who would otherwise be consumed. And if we refuse your gift? Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Then you face the hunters as you are, Webb replied with something that might have been sympathy. Fragile, mortal, delicious. Rodriguez hefted his plasma rifle, checking the charge level. How do we fight them? Webb's laugh was like breaking glass. You cannot fight them, not as you are. But there's another way. The real colonists, the ones you came to rescue, they still exist, in a manner of speaking. Their minds are preserved within the collective consciousness of the sanctuary. They have been waiting, hoping, planning for someone like you to arrive. What do you mean? Zara demanded. Before Webb could answer, the ground beneath their feet began to shake. Through the fog, something massive was moving toward them. Not the hunters, but something else entirely. The crystalline formations throughout the valley began to glow brighter, pulsing in complex patterns that seemed almost like a code. The builder's wake, Webb said, and for the first time, there was genuine emotion in his voice, fear. They do not usually take direct interest in such small matters, but your arrival has complicated things. The fog began to part, revealing a structure that defied every law of physics and architecture that Zara knew. It rose from the center of the valley like a twisted spire of impossible geometry, its surfaces reflecting light that wasn't there and casting shadows in directions that made her eyes water to follow. And from that structure came a sound. Not the alien moaning they'd heard before, but something else. Human voices, singing in harmony. The song was in Terran standard, but it was like nothing she'd ever heard before. Complex, layered, filled with mathematical precision and emotional depth that spoke directly to the soul. The real colonists, Webb said quietly. They sing to maintain their individuality within the collective. They sing to remember what they once were. And now they sing to call for help. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her scanner beeping frantically. Captain, the energy readings from that structure are off the charts. Whatever it is, it's not entirely in our dimension. Parts of it exist in spaces that shouldn't be possible. It's a prison, came a new voice, and everyone turned to see another figure approaching through the fog. This one looked human, genuinely human, not the almost right appearance of the transformed colonists. She was wearing the tattered remains of an Aurora uniform, and her face was gaunt with exhaustion and years of struggle. Dr. Sarah Chun, the woman, identified herself. Chief xenobiologist of the Aurora expedition. I've been hiding in the ruins for, God, I don't even know how long anymore. Time doesn't work right here. You're alive, Zara breathed. Actually alive. Shin nodded grimly. One of the few who refused the transformation. The builders don't like dissent, so they've been hunting me for years. But I've learned things, Captain. Things about this place, about what really happened to my people. Webb was backing away now, his form becoming less stable with each step. She lies, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. She speaks poison, tries to turn you against the sanctuary. Do not listen to her madness. The sanctuary is a lie, Chun continued, ignoring the false captain. The builders don't offer salvation. They offer servitude. They collect intelligent species, strip away everything that makes them unique, and turn them into extensions of their own will. The real colonists are still in there, but they're prisoners in their own minds. That's impossible, Dr. Vasquez protested. We heard them singing. You heard them screaming, Chen corrected. The builders interpret their desperate attempts at communication as music. They find our pain aesthetically pleasing. The structure in the center of the valley pulsed brighter, and the singing grew louder. But now that Chen had pointed out, Zara could hear what it really was. Thousands of voices crying out in harmony, not in celebration, but in anguish. The mathematical precision wasn't art. It was the ordered desperation of minds trying to maintain their sanity in the face of absolute horror. How many? Zara asked quietly. All of them, Chen replied. 20,000 colonists, plus the crews of every ship that's been drawn here over the past centuries. The builders have been collecting intelligent life for millennia. We're just the latest additions to their gallery. A new sound began to echo through the valley, the roar of the hunters drawing closer. Through the fog, Zara could see massive shapes moving with purpose toward their position. They had minutes, maybe less, before the creatures found them. There has to be a way out, Rodriguez said, checking his weapon again. Some way to fight back. There is, Chun said, and her voice carried a note of desperate hope. But it requires someone to go into the structure voluntarily. To join the collective not as a prisoner, but as a saboteur. The builder's control system is based on mental dominance. They can't process the concept of willing sacrifice for others. It's their one weakness. You're talking about suicide, Hayes protested. I'm talking about choice, Chin corrected. The builders can twist unwilling minds, but they can't corrupt a willing sacrifice made out of love. Someone goes in, finds the control nodes, and breaks them from the inside. It would free all the prisoners at once. And destroy whoever goes in, Zara said. Maybe. Or maybe they'd become something new, a bridge between human consciousness and the builder's technology. We don't know, but it's the only chance we have. The hunters were getting closer now. Through the fog, Zara could see glimpses of their true forms. Things that moved like liquid shadow, with too many limbs, and eyes that burned with the light of dying stars. They flowed across the landscape like living nightmares, consuming everything in their path. Captain, Rodriguez said urgently, whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. Zara looked at her team, scientists and technicians who had volunteered to help save people they'd never met. Good people who deserved to see their families again. Then, she looked at Chun, who had spent years fighting a hopeless battle to stay human in a place that actively worked to strip away humanity. I'll go, she said quietly. No, Chin said immediately. It has to be me. I know the layout, I know how their systems work. And I don't have anything left to lose. You have your humanity, Zara pointed out. That's everything. Chun smiled, and for the first time since they'd met her, she looked peaceful. Exactly, and I'm going to use it to set everyone else free. Before anyone could stop her, she was running toward the twisted spire at the center of the valley. The false web tried to intercept her, but his form was too unstable now, too far from anything resembling reality. Chin passed right through him as if he were made of mist. No, Webb screamed, his voice distorting into something that hurt to hear. You don't understand what you're doing. The collective must be maintained. The harmony must be preserved. But Chin was already at the base of the structure, placing her hands against its impossible surface. The building's glow intensified, and the singing screaming of the trapped colonists grew louder, more urgent. For a moment, Zara thought she could hear individual voices in the chaos. A child calling for a mother, a man reciting poetry to maintain his sanity, an elderly woman humming a lullaby she'd learned on Earth. The structure began to change, its impossible geometry shifting and flowing like liquid. Cracks of pure light spread across its surface, and the fog around the valley began to thin. For the first time since they'd arrived on the planet, Zara could see stars overhead. She's doing it, Dr. Vasquez whispered. She's actually doing it. But the hunters had noticed the change too. They moved faster now, converging on the valley with predatory hunger. Whatever Chun was doing, it was drawing their attention like blood in the water. We need to buy our time, Zara said, raising her sidearm. Form a perimeter. Keep those things away from the structure. Captain, our weapons won't even scratch those creatures, Martinez protested. Then, we'll have to be creative, Zara replied grimly. Remember, we're humans. We don't give up, we don't surrender, and we sure as hell don't let our own people die alone. As the first of the hunters emerged from the fog, a writhing mass of shadows and hunger that defied description, Captain Zaravas and her crew opened fire. Their plasma bolts disappeared into the creature's form without effect, but they kept shooting anyway, because that's what humans did when faced with the impossible. They fought back. Inside the structure, Chin was fighting a battle of her own, not with weapons, but with pure force of will. She could feel the builder's consciousness pressing against her mind, trying to break her down, to strip away her individuality and add her voice to their collective harmony of despair. But she had something they couldn't understand or corrupt: love. Love for her lost crewmates. love for the strangers who had come to rescue them, love for the stubborn, impossible, beautiful diversity of human thought and emotion. And that love was going to set them all free. The structure's transformation accelerated, cracks of light spreading like a web across its surface. The hunters roared their frustration as they realized their prey was about to escape. And deep in the heart of the alien prison, 20,000 human souls prepared to remember what it meant to be free. Dr. Sarah Chun felt her consciousness expand beyond anything she had thought possible. The moment her hands touched the alien structure, she had been pulled into a vast network of minds. 20,000 human souls trapped in digital purgatory, their thoughts and memories woven into a tapestry of suffering that stretched across centuries. But she was not alone. The colonists had been waiting for someone like her, someone who came by choice rather than force. Their collective will reached out to guide her, to show her the weak points in the Builder's control system. Here, whispered the voice of Captain Marcus Webb, the real Webb, not the puppet that had been wearing his face. The primary control node. But be careful. If you destroy it too quickly, the feedback could kill everyone inside. Chen navigated through layers of alien code and human consciousness, her scientific training helping her understand the bizarre fusion of technology and biology that comprised the Builder's prison. The system was beautiful in its complexity and utterly monstrous in its purpose. Outside the structure, Zara and her team fought a desperate holding action against creatures that shouldn't have been able to exist. Their weapons were useless against the hunters' incorporeal forms, but they had discovered that the creatures reacted to certain types of electromagnetic interference. "Ace, boost the power output on your scanner," Zara shouted as one of the shadow things lunged at Rodriguez. Full spectrum EM burst. The communications officer complied, and his scanner exploded in a shower of sparks and blinding light. The hunter recoiled as if it had been struck, its form becoming less stable, less coherent. They're vulnerable to quantum fluctuations, Dr. Vasquez realized. The scanner burst disrupted their dimensional cohesion. It wasn't much of a weakness, but it was something. They began overloading their equipment systematically, creating electromagnetic chaos that forced the hunters to maintain their distance. But their gear wouldn't last forever, and more creatures were emerging from the fog with each passing minute. Inside the structure, Chen was making progress. She had found the first control node, a crystalline structure that pulsed with the combined dreams and nightmares of the trapped colonists. But touching it would mean experiencing every moment of their captivity, feeling their pain as if it were her own. "Do it," urged the voice of Elena Rodriguez, a botanist who had died in the first wave of transformations. "We've been waiting so long for someone to share this burden. You don't have to carry it alone." Chun reached out and grasped the crystal. Pain beyond description flooded through her. 2.5 centuries of slow, inexorable loss of self, of watching friends and family fade away bit by bit until only echoes remained. She felt herself screaming, but couldn't hear the sound over the roar of 20,000 minds crying out in unison. But in that moment of shared agony, something beautiful happened. The colonists' individual voices began to emerge from the chaos. They sang to her, not the harmonic screaming the builders interpreted as music, but real songs. Lullabies from Earth, work songs from the colony ships, hymns and folk melodies that spoke of hope and home and the unbreakable bonds between people who chose to face the unknown together. And with their songs came their knowledge. The locations of the other control nodes, the builders' true weaknesses, the way to turn their own system against them. Chun began to understand that the builders weren't just collecting intelligent life. They were trying to solve a problem. They were an ancient species facing extinction, and they believed that by absorbing other forms of consciousness, they could find a way to survive the heat death of their universe. Their prison wasn't malicious, it was desperate. But knowing the reason for their torment didn't make it any less wrong. Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Half their equipment was destroyed, and the hunters were adapting to their defensive measures. Worse, the false colonists, the transformed puppets of the builder's will, were beginning to surround them. "Captain," the fake Webb called out, his form now openly monstrous, "you cannot win this battle. Accept the gift willingly, and your deaths will be quick and painless." "Counter-offer," Zara replied, shooting him in what might have been his face. The plasma bolt passed right through him, but it made her feel better. How about you go to hell? Webb's laugh was like breaking crystal. Hell is a human concept, Captain. We have moved beyond such primitive notions. We offer transcendence, unity, purpose beyond your wildest dreams. Yeah, Rodriguez called out, overloading another scanner to drive back a hunter. Well, we offer something you guys seem to have forgotten about. Free will. The structure was changing more rapidly now. Cracks of pure light spread across its surface like a spider's web, and the fog that had covered the valley for so long began to dissipate. For the first time in centuries, genuine sunlight touched the alien landscape. Inside, Chen had found a second control node. This one was harder to reach. She had to navigate through layers of alien programming that actively tried to corrupt her thoughts and turn her into another puppet. But she had the colonists with her now, their combined will forming a shield around her consciousness. Almost there, whispered Dr. James Harrison, the expedition's chief engineer. But, Chen, you need to know, when you destroy the third node, the whole system will collapse. Everyone inside will be freed, but the dimensional barriers will fail. The hunters will be able to enter our reality directly. How many of them are there? Chen asked. Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. They've been gathering here for millennia, drawn by the psychic emanations from the prison. When the barriers fall, they'll pour through into normal space. Chun felt her heart sink. She could free the colonists, but only by unleashing something far worse upon the galaxy. The hunters wouldn't stop with this planet. They would spread throughout human space, consuming every intelligent mind they encountered. But then another voice spoke up, Captain Webb himself, the real man who had led 20,000 people into the dark between stars. There's another way, he said quietly. The Builder's technology doesn't just imprison minds, it can also create them. If someone were to stay behind, to become the core consciousness of a new collective, they could turn the prison into a fortress. Use the Builder's own power to contain the hunters permanently. Someone would have to sacrifice themselves, Chen realized. Not sacrifice, Webb corrected. Transform. Become something new, something that bridges human consciousness and alien technology. It wouldn't be death. It would be evolution. Chun considered this as she approached the third and final control node. Around her, the mental landscape was crumbling as the Builder's control systems failed. The colonists were already beginning to remember who they had been before the transformation. Soon they would be free to live again, to love again, to choose their own destinies. But freedom always came with a price. Outside the structure, the battle was reaching its climax. The hunters had grown bolder as the dimensional barriers weakened, taking on more solid forms that were vulnerable to conventional weapons. Zara and her team fought with everything they had, but they were vastly outnumbered. Captain, Hayes called out, his voice tight with panic. I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. Whatever's happening in there, it's affecting the entire planet. Through the thinning fog, they could see other structures beginning to glow, alien ruins scattered across the landscape, each one pulsing in harmony with the central spire. The Builder's network was larger than they had imagined, spanning continents and possibly reaching into other dimensions entirely. And all of it was coming apart at once. We need to get clear, Dr. Vasquez shouted. If that entire network destabilizes simultaneously. Her words were cut off as a massive tremor shook the ground. Cracks began to appear in the air itself, revealing glimpses of other realities beyond, star fields that had never known Earth's light, alien cities built from crystallized time, vast libraries where every book was written in languages that predated human civilization. The barriers between dimensions weren't just weakening, they were collapsing entirely. Inside the structure, Chun stood before the final control node. It was beautiful in its alien complexity, a crystal formation that seemed to contain entire galaxies within its faceted surface. Destroying it would free the colonists instantly and give them a chance to escape before the dimensional barriers failed completely. But it would also doom the galaxy to the hunter's hunger. She thought of her crewmates, trapped for so long in digital limbo. She thought of Captain Voss and her team, who had risked everything to answer a distress call from strangers. She thought of humanity itself, stubborn, chaotic, magnificent humanity, spreading across the stars with nothing but hope and determination. They deserved to be free. All of them. Chin placed her hand on the final control node, but instead of destroying it, she began to merge with it. She felt her consciousness expand, encompassing the entire network, touching every imprisoned mind and every control system. The builder's technology flowed through her like liquid fire, rewriting her at the most fundamental level. She was no longer merely human. She was something new, a bridge between species, a guardian standing at the threshold between order and chaos. "What are you doing?" Webb's voice called out, filled with alarm and wonder. "What I have to," Chun replied, her thoughts now echoing through the entire network. "What we all have to do. We're going to protect them. All of them. Humans and aliens alike." The transformation was complete. Where Dr. Sarah Chun had stood, there was now something else, a consciousness that was both human and other, individual and collective, mortal and eternal. She had become the heart of a new kind of entity, one that could stand against the hunters while preserving the freedom of those she protected. The colonists felt the change immediately. Their prison cells became doorways. Their chains became choices. For the first time in centuries, they were free to leave. But many of them chose to stay, to become part of something larger than themselves. Not as prisoners, but as willing participants in humanity's next evolutionary step. Outside, the hunters felt the change too. The easy prey they had been hunting suddenly became something else entirely, something that could hurt them, trap them, force them back into the spaces between dimensions where they belonged. The real battle was about to begin. But for the first time since arriving on the planet, Zara felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The transformation rippled outward from the central spire like a wave of pure possibility. Where the builder's oppressive control had once held sway, something entirely new took its place. A collective consciousness that was voluntary, democratic, and utterly defiantly human in its core values. Captain Zara Voss felt the change in the air itself. The fog that had seemed so malevolent moments before now moved with purpose and intelligence, but it no longer felt alien. It felt like protection. "Captain," Hayes called out, wonder in his voice, "the dimensional readings are stabilizing. The barriers aren't collapsing. They're being reinforced." But from the inside, through the clearing mist, they could see the colonists emerging from the alien structures. But these weren't the transformed puppets they had encountered before. These were real people, human people, blinking in genuine sunlight for the first time in centuries. They moved with the slight disorientation of those who had just awakened from a very long, very strange dream. But they weren't defenseless. As the hunters rushed toward these newly freed minds, the fog itself rose up to meet them. What had once been a tool of oppression now became a weapon of liberation, wrapping around the shadow creatures and forcing them back into the spaces between realities where they belonged. The voice that spoke to them now came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the air itself. It was Chin's voice, but changed, enhanced, carrying harmonics of 20,000 other voices within it. "You came for us," the voice said, and Zara could hear tears in it, tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude beyond measure. "After all this time, someone finally came for us." "Dr. Chun," Zara called out. "Are you?" "I'm what I chose to become," came the reply. "Not human, not alien, but something new. Something that can bridge the gap between what was and what might be. I am the guardian of the threshold, the keeper of the choice." Around them, the landscape continued to transform. The alien structures remained, but they were changing, becoming more recognizably human in their proportions and purposes. Gardens that had grown alien fruits now bloomed with roses and wheat and apple trees. The crystalline formations that had hurt to look at directly now served as communication networks, carrying messages of hope and reunion across the scattered settlements. But the real miracle was the people themselves. Families separated by centuries were reuniting. Children who had been transformed beyond recognition were remembering their names, their loves, their dreams. Scientists were comparing notes on discoveries made during their long captivity. Engineers were already planning improvements to the colony infrastructure. "Captain Voss," came a familiar voice, and Zara turned to see the real Marcus Webb approaching. Not the puppet that had tried to deceive them, but the actual man who had commanded the Aurora. He looked exactly as he had in the historical records, untouched by the centuries that had passed. "Captain Webb," she replied, offering a salute. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." Webb returned the salute, but his eyes were troubled. "The honor is mine, Captain. But I'm afraid our reunion is premature. The threat isn't over. It's just beginning." Before Zara could ask what he meant, the answer became horribly clear. On the horizon, new shapes were moving through the fog. But these weren't the shadow hunters they had been fighting. These were ships, hundreds of them, their hulls bearing the distinctive angular markings of the Void Seekers. "Who are the Void Seekers?" Dr. Vasquez asked, checking her scanner readings with growing alarm. "A species that discovered this place millennia ago," Webb explained grimly. "They made a deal with the Builders, protection from the Hunters in exchange for a steady supply of fresh minds to feed the collective. They've been seeding other worlds with the Builders' fog, creating new prisons, new harvesting grounds." "They're slavers," Rodriguez growled, checking his weapon. "Worse than slavers," Webb corrected. "Slavers want to preserve their property. The Void Seekers want to consume it utterly. They've turned the Builders' search for transcendence into an industry of spiritual cannibalism." The lead Void Seeker ship was massive, easily 10 times the size of any human vessel Zara had ever seen. Its hull was covered in the same crystalline growths they had seen on the planet's surface, but these pulsed with malevolent energy rather than the warm light of Chen's transformed sanctuary. "We need to evacuate the colonists," Zara said, though she knew it was impossible. Even if their ship hadn't been destroyed, there was no way to transport 20,000 people off-planet before the Void Seekers arrived. "No," Chen's voice echoed around them, stronger now, more confident. "Running won't solve anything. They'll just follow us, harvest whatever world we flee to. This ends here today." "How?" Zara asked. "We're outgunned, outmanned, and stranded on an alien world. But we're not alone," came a new voice from the clearing fog. It was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the botanist who had died in the first wave of transformations. But, like Shun, she had been changed by her experience in the collective. She retained her human appearance, but there was something else in her eyes now, an awareness that encompassed vast networks of possibility. "The Builder's technology isn't just on this planet," she explained. "It's spread throughout this entire sector of space, creating a vast network of connected worlds. Most of them are prisons, yes, but a precious few, developed resistance to the Void Seekers' influence. Hidden colonies, refugee settlements, groups of people who've been fighting this war for generations." As she spoke, new readings began appearing on Hayes's rebuilt scanner. Ships were emerging from hyperspace throughout the system. Not the angular vessels of the Void Seekers, but a motley collection of human freighters, alien refugee ships, and constructs that defied easy classification. "The Terran colonial marines," Webb said with a grin that made him look decades younger. "I sent out a call through the network. Told them that the lost colony of Aurora was finally ready to fight back." The lead ship in the approaching fleet was a massive human dreadnought that Zara recognized from her academy textbooks. The indomitable flagship of Admiral Sarah Henderson, one of the most decorated officers in the colonial marines. She had thought the ship was serving on the far side of human space, but apparently some calls were important enough to bring the Marines running across the galaxy. Admiral Henderson's voice crackled through the communications network that Sean had established, carried by the fog itself in a way that bypassed all attempts at jamming or interference. "This is Admiral Henderson of the Terran Colonial Marines. We received your distress call, Captain Webb. Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder getting through Void Seeker space." The joke was pure Marine gallows humor, but it carried an undertone of absolute determination that made Zara's heart race with hope. "Admiral," Webb responded, "we have 20,000 civilian refugees and a new form of defensive technology. But the Void Seekers have brought their harvest fleet. We're outnumbered 30 to 1. "Understood, Captain. But you've forgotten something important about Marines. We don't count the odds. We make them irrelevant." What followed was unlike any space battle Zara had ever studied or imagined. The Void Seekers attacked with their usual tactics, overwhelming firepower designed to disable rather than destroy, capture rather than kill. They wanted the colonists alive and aware for the harvesting process. But the Marines didn't fight like any force the Void Seekers had encountered before. They used the fog itself as a weapon, channeling Chen's consciousness through their targeting systems to strike at the weak points in alien shields. Human fighters materialized out of hyperspace directly inside enemy formations, their pilots guided by the prescient awareness of the collective consciousness. And on the planet's surface, the colonists themselves joined the fight. 2.5 centuries of imprisonment had given them intimate knowledge of their captors' weaknesses. They turned the Builders' own technology against the Void Seekers, using the crystalline networks to disrupt alien communications and navigation. But it was the fog that proved to be the decisive factor. Under Chen's guidance, it reached out beyond the planet's atmosphere, forming impossible structures in the vacuum of space. These constructs served as shields for the human ships, as communication networks that couldn't be jammed, and as weapons that could reach across dimensional barriers to strike at targets that shouldn't have been touchable. The Void Seekers found themselves fighting not just a human fleet, but the will of 20,000 liberated minds, and the collective determination of every person who had ever refused to surrender to hopelessness. Admiral Henderson's tactical assessment was characteristically blunt. They're running. The cowards are actually running. And they were. The Void Seeker harvest fleet, faced with prey that fought back with technology they couldn't understand, and a ferocity they had never encountered, broke off the attack and fled into hyperspace. They left behind several disabled vessels and a great deal of evidence about their other operations throughout the galaxy. In the aftermath, as rescue ships began the long process of evacuating those colonists who chose to leave, Zara found herself standing in the rebuilt settlement that had once been the heart of the Builders' prison. It was recognizably human now, but enhanced by alien technology in ways that spoke of vast potential for the future. Chun appeared beside her, not physically, but as a projection of light and mist that somehow conveyed more presence than any flesh and blood form could have managed. "What happens now?" Zara asked. "Now we build something new," Chin replied. "Not human, not alien, but something that includes the best of both. The colonists who choose to stay will help me tend the networks, protect the refugee settlements, and prepare for the next time the Void Seekers come hunting. And those who want to leave, they'll carry the story with them. Tell the galaxy what happened here, what's possible when people refuse to accept that suffering is inevitable. Some of them will establish new colonies. Others will join the Marines in hunting down the remaining harvest fleets. But all of them will remember that humans don't give up." As if to emphasize the point, Admiral Henderson's voice echoed across the settlement through the fog-based communication network. "Attention, all personnel. The Colonial Marines will be establishing a permanent base in this system. Our mission is to hunt down every last Void Seeker operation and shut them down permanently. Any volunteers for extended duty will be welcomed with open arms and full Marine benefits." The response was immediate and overwhelming, not just from the Aurora colonists, but from crews throughout the rescue fleet. The battle had awakened something in humanity, a recognition that some fights were worth anything, that freedom was not just a political concept, but a fundamental force in the universe. Zara accepted command of the new Marine Scout ship Aurora's Dawn, tasked with exploring the network of worlds that the Builders had seeded throughout the sector. Some contained prisons that needed to be liberated. Others held refugee settlements that needed protection. And a few, she suspected, might hold the key to understanding how the Builders' technology could be used not to imprison minds, but to free them. As her new ship lifted off from the transformed world, she looked back one last time at the settlement where 20,000 people had been held captive for centuries, only to emerge stronger, more united, and more determined than ever to ensure that no one else would suffer the same fate. The fog rolled across the landscape in patterns that spoke of intelligence, of choice, of hope made manifest. And somewhere in that mist, Dr. Sarah Chun continued her eternal watch, guardian of the threshold between what was and what could be. The distress calls had been answered. The rescue was complete. But the real mission, the one that would define humanity's place in a galaxy full of wonders and horrors, was just beginning. From the fog, Marines emerged, and they were ready for whatever came next.